This one seems technically cooler, so it's all part of the program. Okay, we're gonna get rolling again here. Exciting things. It's time for the Marsh. I'll just peek out the door here. All right, good news. Everybody's in. That's not your first slide either, is it? We'll back that up. We're cheating. So we're moving on to the state of Coutts Paradise Marsh in particular. I'm going the wrong way. There, that's slide one. Slide one, you know what you're after now. This will be done by Miss Jennifer Bowman, who now exceeds 20 years working here. There you go. Senior aquatic ecologist and Guelph girl. There you go. Turn it into a bit of a joke, isn't it? Anyway, the Marsh, always an adventure, inspires people, causes people to curse. We love it, we hate it, Anyway, bit by bit, comes back. In this picture, kind of looks marshy. We'll see what Jen has to say.
Thanks, Tys. I'll make sure people can hear me. Okay, so Jennifer Bowman, like Tys mentioned, I've been here looking at restoring this marsh for 20 years now, so seeing quite the change. Mostly positive, it's like bouncing a ball in an elevator. Lots of up and downs, but generally positive trends. So I'm going to talk about water quality and the habitat, which is the plants. Kind of sets the tone for my intern's presentation when she's going to talk about the exciting stuff, which is the fish and amphibians. I had this problem before. Maybe it's just slow. Okay. So we started the year, we didn't have too much snowpack. Everyone remember 2023 was kind of a mild winter. So we measure our water quality through the growing season, beginning of May to the end of September. And we take note of when we get our storm events. This year we had 3. And one of them was really significant. These are storm events that lined up with our water quality measurement. So we had a measurement just after that major storm we had. So there was 12 millimeters of rain, but I think the impacts were still lingering. And at the lake level, so these are river mouth marshes, we get impacts from the lake level management that happens in Lake Ontario. It's managed by a dam, Moses Saunders Dam at the mouth of St. Lawrence. So this year we tracked pretty closely to the long-term average. Last year we were above the average quite significantly, but this year we were quite lower and actually below the average for part of the summer, which helps us with our planting. So we had great water to start the year. The headwaters were full of clean, cool water that supplied Coutts with lovely water. It was actually looked tannic in the marsh, first time I'd ever seen that. And we didn't have too many storms right at the beginning in May, so it led good conditions for getting our plants going. They really need that clean water in May. We hit our high water mark in July this year, so it was quite late, but then we kept with just below the average. So it was a low water level for the fall. Most people saw lots of mud flats. That's very typical of Coutts. It's a shallow system. So when we take note of the rain events that we have in our watershed, this really impacts the amount of sewage that comes down to the river mouths. We are located near urban centers, so we have Hamilton, we have Burlington close by. So the city of Hamilton has one wastewater treatment plant at the mouth of the Red Hill and then a second one in Dundas. And the one in Dundas does supply water to Coutts Paradise. It comes in through West Pond, Desjardins Canal at the back of the marsh. But when we have these storm events, we get a lot of runoff combining with our sewage. So all of the city that was built before the 1950s was built on a combined system. So the rainwater everything, all the water that washes off your roof, your driveway, your streets, it mixes with the sewage, and that volume is just too much for the wastewater treatment plant to manage. So the city has built large tanks to hold that water and supply it to the wastewater treatment plant slowly after the storm. But a lot of times that volume is just way too much, especially with the storms we get now. So sometimes those overflow. So this table here is just summarizing the overflow events that happen in 2024. I totaled it for the year and then also separated out the overflows that happened during our growing season when we were measuring water quality, because that does have an impact on the marsh. So there was a total of 195,000 meters squared of, or meters cubed of water. I'm not sure how I progressed that. So this is a map showing our sampling stations. We have the two systems, Grindstone Creek, which is up here, and then we have Coots Paradise. And we measure water quality every other week. And we have two delisting stations. Hamilton Harbor is part of a remedial action plan for Hamilton Harbor, Coots Paradise and Grindstone Marsh contribute data to the delisting of Hamilton Harbor. And it's an area of concern, so we have a number of beneficial use impairments that we want to improve. Water quality is one of them, habitat is another. These ones, we're a very important player in supplying information to track the success. So we supply water quality information. And I'm going to go over some of the results from this past year. So water clarity is essential for growing the habitat. So growing the plants, we need to be able to see in the water. The plants need to be able to get that light hitting the bottom of the marsh. That's our target. So in Coots Paradise, that beginning part of the year, we were getting light penetrating all the way to the bottom. It wasn't as deep as our target. So for water clarity, we have two measures, Secchi and turbidity. Turbidity is exactly what you would think. Lower number is cleaner water, higher number is more turbid or browner water. Secchi is the opposite because it's a measure of the amount of light penetration. So you want a higher number. And in Coots, if you look at the plot on the upper graph, you can see we had good clarity at the beginning part of the year. And this is when we grew our plants. We did have those three storms. I've kind of indicated them on the plot. And we got a dip in water clarity when those happen, which is very typical, exactly what you would expect. Hopefully it comes back up after things have moved out. But over the year, we usually lose our clarity through the later part of the season. We have good clarity in the beginning, grow our plants, and then things just get too warm, too much nutrients, and then we get the algae growing, and it kind of falls apart. That's kind of been the trend that we've seen in Coots. So Grindstone, our other system, we don't have any carp management in that system, so we don't see much of a trend. I've plotted Grindstone in the green, and most of the time you can see it's kind of all over the place. But in Coots, this one for phosphorus, this is one of our nutrients that we track. It's usually bound quite tightly to sediment, so when sediment comes up, phosphorus comes up as well. It's usually a limiting nutrient, so when we get the phosphorus in the water, that allows the algae to grow, the plants. If we can keep it below a certain level, we'll get a system dominated by plants, not algae, which is what we want. And that red bar there is our target, so we're trying to keep levels below that, which will allow us to dominate our system with plants, I think. So the beginning part of the year, we had low nutrients in Coots. Those plants were growing, and we got that good coverage that you can see an image in the bottom there. The opposite is in Digit and Canal, typical through the summer, we get lots of filamentous algae growing and poor clarity. Suspended solids is a measure of sediment in the water column. And we don't want too much sediment. It will cloud up the water, increases that turbidity. The plants can't get light to grow. It also can settle on eggs and suffocate amphibian or fish eggs. And it can also just deposit in the marsh and bury the seed bank. It also settles on the plants and kind of impacts them as well. So for suspended solids, we're often meeting our target in coots. And in grindstone, we had a couple samples that were meeting those targets. But like I mentioned, the grindstone system where our delisting station is quite shallow. There's a lot of fill that's been deposited over the years. It's really easily suspended, and it's open to the harbor, so there are carp that use that system. So, looking at the trends in water quality over the year, this is a water quality index that the Canadian Council of Ministry of Environment has produced, and we can measure kind of just a step back and look at the water quality as a whole and get an indication of where we're at. Generally, we're not where we want to be. We want to be up closer to that good level. And we've been tracking close to between poor and marginal, lots of up and downs. And but generally, the trend for coots is towards better water quality. And in grindstone, it's a little bit more muddled. There's not really much of a trend there. But we're not doing any active restoration in that system. So in that part of the system. So this year, in 2024, we did some sediment sampling. We measured nutrients and heavy metals in the sediment. We took these samples in November, and there's a lot of information on this slide, but basically, the heavy metals were not too high. We have a couple measures for understanding the levels, a lowest effect level and a severe effect level. So the lowest effect level is sediment that's considered clean to marginally polluted, whereas a severe effect level is sediment that's considered heavily polluted. So I've indicated those levels on those two plots there. But the heavy metals were across the board above the lowest effect level for copper and zinc, and no sites were above the severe effect level. So that's good. But we'll have to keep an eye on a couple of them. For nutrients is really the part that coots and grindstone are suffering in for their sediment, where there's lots of nutrients that are tied in with the sediment, phosphorus and nitrogen. So for nitrogen, we saw an increase in the levels basically at all of the sites, except for two of them, our delisting sites. And it was even a twofold increase for most of the sites from our last sampling year, which was 2013. So we're not really sure why it increased so much and the impact that's having on the system. It's particularly TKN that we saw that really high spike in. So TKN's an indicator of sewage usually. And phosphorus, we saw an increase at most of our sites, except for the sites closer to the wastewater treatment plant in Dundas. So we have the canal and West Pond, where we have been keeping an eye on the nutrients. The phosphorus in particular has been very high. We've seen very high levels in the canal that are above the severe effect level, and we've known that for a few years. And it remains above the severe effect level, so we're actually in conversation with the city about doing some mitigation there, because we're looking at improving the water quality coming in from the wastewater treatment plant, and we wouldn't want to spend all that money and then not mitigate the soils, which can be offloading. So we want to do something to prevent that from happening. Okay, so on to vegetation. Okay, so we have the two systems, Grindstone and Coots. And our vegetation monitoring, we monitor the meadow marsh, the emergent marsh, and the submergent marsh community. Meadow marsh and the emergent marsh don't change too much year to year, so we don't measure them every year. The submergent marsh is very variable, so it really depends on the year, the water quality, the water levels that we get. So it fluctuates quite a lot. And in Grindstone, our target is to have 40 hectares of vegetation in our system. We're about halfway there. So some improvements still needed. But this year I did notice the lilies were quite expanding in a couple of our systems, our protected ponds, than I've noticed in previous years. So I'm seeing a positive trend. They are floating leaved plants, so they kind of escape the impacts of turbid waters, but it's still good. Oh, sorry, I missed Coots. So Coots Paradise, we track the vegetation the same, and there's been really good improvements in the marsh since that 2014 levels have really increased. We removed a lot of carp in 2012, and we saw an explosion in the plant community because the carp really stir up the sediment and make the water turbid, which impacts the plant growth. But the plants have rebounded. We got set back a little bit when we had some sewage inputs and high water levels in the lake, and they've come up again. So this year was a little bit worse than last year, but still we grew a lot of plants, specifically in the early part of the year. And they do get impacted by storms, so that's our biggest challenge right now. In Coots Paradise, we're dominated by just a couple species. They're early succession plant species, and they're sensitive to disturbance. Once the water heats up in the summer, they start kind of dying off a little bit. They release some phosphorus, the algae starts growing, the water's warm, and the algae just takes off and they just kind of sink. And this year we had a major storm that washed them all out of the system, so they all ended up at the fishway, and we basically lost all of our plants except for the floating leaf plants. So we had water lilies that persisted throughout the year in Coots, better than they have in previous years. Invasive plant removal is a task that we take on in the fall. We've been managing Phragmites since 2013. We're so close to getting rid of it, but we have little populations that keep, little stands that keep kind of regenerating, or new seeds come in and we get a few stems. They're hard to find in the cattails, so we just keep on it. But we started with 12 hectares and now, I don't know how much we'd have, but it would only amount to meter squared of frag, so. And this is just a photo demonstrating the improvements we've seen in one of our areas. Lots of native species that come up from the seed bank. And we do mannagrass removal as well in our meadow marsh and emergent marsh. We have a lot of mannagrass, and you can see the stands are quite larger, much larger than the Phragmites. It's going to be a longer process getting rid of this plant, but we're working really hard, and we do see very positive results. This is a photo taken in the Spencer Creek floodplain, and we had all kinds of swamp milkweed that popped up. It was beautiful. Wetland planting, we do a lot of restoration planting in the marsh. And Coots this year, we planted over 14,000 plants. It's crazy. Most of them are cattails. We have a couple projects where we're really trying to expand the emergent marsh. And in Grindstone, we planted over 1,000 plants. Mostly shoreline stabilization projects and just establishing new species in grindstone. One of our main projects includes to really help contain stormwater in our systems. Because we're at the mouth, we can't really, we get the water that comes to us and we have to deal with it. So we're trying to rebuild our creek channels that we've lost to help keep that stormwater contained so it doesn't mix with the entire system. And in Coots, we're doing that with plantings. So we started a new method in last year, adding some posts and Christmas trees to create a bit of a barrier first, and then that's kind of taking the place of our fencing, our temporary fencing, and this is something we can just leave out. It's also acting as a sediment trap, and it also provides habitat. And the plants are doing quite well behind it. So we planted over 8,000 plants in the Delta. And in Grindstone, we use mostly Christmas trees in our berms. And a lot of the plants are coming up on their own now that they have some sediment being deposited, and the creek banks are showing lots of vegetation growth now. And one of our side projects for establishing new species in the marsh is we do wild rice restoration. This is a species that would have been dominant back a long time. It has a lot of heritage, and it's very important for Indigenous people. They would collect it, and it's food for lots of animals as well. So we've been working for a long time to try and restore it. It's quite variable. Lots of things like to eat it, so we have to protect it. And we've started using more woody enclosures, so you might have seen these around in the marsh. We get a lot of questions about what they are, but just trying to protect our wild rice. And that's it.
So, lots there. Clearly a seesaw affair. There was a lot of people looking over the edge of boats and going, I can see the bottom for a while, which was fun. There's not very many people alive who've seen the bottom of Coots in the summer because it was so dirty for so long. I know I went like every week in the evening just to go, I'm looking at the bottom. This is right. Anyway, any questions for Dan? Or are you going to think on that one? There's one.
Yep. The manna grass is everywhere.
Yeah.
Is anyone else taking its threat seriously?
So the question is anyone else looking after managing manna grass? I know it's a very localized problem. We have the first of it showed up on our property at the Desjardins Canal. So I think we have more than most other properties do. But CBC has some, and I think there's some in Burlington. I don't know that anyone else has actually started tackling it. It's
The grass that is all by the QE and that, and the ditches used to be full of goldenrod and stuff. Now it's a big grass, and you can see as you go along the QE, all those little ponds that used to be all cattails, they're all this grass. Is
Yeah.
that not manna grass?
No, that's not manna grass. That's Phragmites. It's Phragmites.
Phragmites.
Yeah, so that's the other species we've been tackling.
So they're not seeming to do anything.
There's actually been a lot of uptake in managing Phragmites over even just the past 5 years. So there is a lot more management happening. It's just going to be a little bit slow because there's a lot out there. It's Ontario's worst invasive species. That's what it's been labeled because it's very widespread and very aggressive. So just keep watching. You'll hopefully start seeing them brown up, and that will mean that the ministry is tackling those populations because that's who has to manage them along the highways.
Which ministry?
Ministry of Transportation, if you're talking about the 400 series highway. But
Yes, it's officially on the list of invasive plants of Ontario. It's got programs for it. It does take money, but There's miles of road. It happens to like the salt a little bit. So imagine roadsides, lots of native plants not so happy. A plant that likes the salt, super happy. It's, I can tell you, whereas this down on the downstream end, as Jen says, a lot of effort gone into just get rid of it from the marshes, so it's a normal chance at a marsh, just cattails or burrweed. I was astounded by how many new ones popped up this year. 50 plus spots, just little spots, but you know they grow 20 feet a year underground, so give them an inch, they take a mile. It's a little tiring. Anyway, definitely one to watch. All right, we're making it to our almost last summary story.